Good morning and welcome to Legacy Planning with local attorney Steve Waltar. Legacy Planning is committed to helping you provide personalized and compassionate estate planning to help you organize and transfer your estate smoothly with minimal taxes, costs, and hassles. Steve has the mind of an attorney and the heart of a pastor, and he'd love to take your call this morning to answer your estate planning questions. The lines are open at 1-800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200. Now, here's your host of Legacy Planning, Steve Waltar.
Good morning, Seattle Live and Local. This is Steve Waltar. We're here with Legacy Planning, and I tell you, it was an interesting week of planning. I was thinking about just some of the people that came in this week. We talked a little bit about reverse mortgages last week, and I had some clients that came in for review. They'd done their planning years ago, and, we talked about long-term care and this and that, but I learned that only one of them was able to qualify for long-term care. The other couldn't, and they really were wrestling. I don't know if you've ever wrestled with how do you provide for your spouse and make sure there's something left for the kids. So we kind of reshuffled their plan and did a safe harbor trust. We figured out there's a way to kind of wait and see when one dies. Either we can kind of protect the assets from the state and make sure there's more left for the kids, or maybe it's just easy to give everything outright to the survivor. And so that's the plan design they really wanted to have. I'm in the business of helping people, right? And so that's why I have to kind of ask a lot of questions. How do you want to provide for things? I had another family. They know that the kids are not that good with money. Statistically, people blow large estates rather rapidly. And this guy had done lots of reading on the Vanderbilts and this and that. And he and his wife, they decided, look, they got a blended family. It's complicated anyway. I don't know if you're out there with a blended family, but that's modern reality, right? They wanted to build a plan that was really a legacy, a lasting legacy. They wanted their plan to last 100 years or more. And so we spent some time to design a plan that would provide, teach the kids management, develop some assets, have some rentals and LLCs, have some things that could last. Make sure the kids don't blow it up when they die. Provide an income source. Teach them how to delay. You don't want to pass on affluenza, right? Teach some values. And they wanted, of course, a lot of my clients, maybe you're out there and you wrestle, how do you make sure the grandkids have an educational fund? I have 2 kids in college, man. College is expensive. So they wanted to design a plan that would provide for educational funds for the grandchildren. They wanted to make sure the kids don't get the money too soon. The assets are protected. Maybe you're wrestling with those sorts of things. I'd love for you to give us a call here at 1-800-955-8200. That is 800-955-8200. And we'll talk about these things. We're here to help you talk about your legacy. I had a client that came in this week, and his wife died rather prematurely of cancer. It was just a mess. And unfortunately, the financial advisor advised his wife to get him off of the beneficiary of the IRA, which is it was bad advice, actually. And then she died, and now the only asset that has to go through freaking probate is what was an IRA. Should have been able to list someone. And so I'm happy to go to court and do a probate. I help people when people die. I help them. In fact, my guest today, he helps people when they die because he runs a funeral home. He does cremation. His name is Jeff, and going to introduce Jeff in a little while. So if you have any questions about death, dying, burial, cost, do you want burial or do you want to do cremation? And how do you choose someone? And what the heck does it cost? By all means, give us a call at 1-800-955-8200. And you can also send us an email to radio@waltar.com. Radio@waltar. It's WALTAR.com. That way we can see your question and address that on the radio or even throughout the week. We can help you with that. So I had one other thing, and that, a lot of things happen in a week of planning, but I had a mother-daughter came in, and the doctor had just said, Mom has dementia. Oh boy. So it's like, what do they do? Do they need a will? Do they need a trust? Is it powers of attorney? What do you do? And who are you going to list? So they were really wrestling with what do they do? But they knew that time to act was now, right? And they did. I think someone even said, hey, go get this form or look at this. They're like, we need to see a professional. So I gave a free consult. They came in, they met with me. And really, for them, what they really needed was the powers of attorney. And they needed them done pronto. If you're going to have a power of attorney and you're going to sell real property, you know, it's going to have to be recorded. Anyway, that's my field. I do this sort of thing. So they were wrestling. How do they handle this? Thankfully, they faced the music. They came in and they saw me, and I was able to help them. In fact, I can't promise this always, but while they were there, we created the powers of attorney. We witnessed. We signed it. We really helped them because they were under some real big pressures to get things done while there was still capacity. So that's legacy planning, right? I help people. I don't know if they need a will or trust. I don't know if you're driving around out there, you're having your morning coffee. Do I need a living will or a living trust? What's the difference? Is will the way to go? And, you know, hey, that's what legacy planning is. That's my field. That's what I do. I went to seminary prior to law school. I got the mind of an attorney and the heart of a pastor. And I think that's important stuff. So I want to introduce Jeff Jorgenson, who he runs a funeral home, a cremation and funeral home. I'll let him describe that. But he's a unique guy. He's got an interesting background. He wants to do this in a green fashion, so we may talk about that. But again, during the show today, if you've got any question about the costs of a cremation or how to do things, you should give us a call at 1-800-955-8200. That's 1-800-955-8200. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Why don't tell the listeners a little bit about your background and then, you know, what is Elemental? Why did you start it?
All right. Well, Elemental Cremation and Burial is sort of an outgrowth of several different careers gone by. I was in restaurants for years, and then I got into the aviation business, and aviation to funeral isn't a natural segue, but I was fortunate enough to end up selling pre-planned funeral and cemetery in North Seattle.
Okay.
And
that's a big industry, actually.
It's huge. It's
I hear it's $25 billion nationally, or it's just like crazy.
Yeah, there's a few numbers out there with a big B that are bandied about, and it's real money. I mean, it's big cash. So, you know, and it's a very specific end of life planning, legacy planning.
Right.
You know, you work with that on a daily basis, and as do I. But I've got my own little tiny boutique niche section of it.
Right.
And, you know...
And you'd been at some of the big funeral home type of providers, right?
I have. I had the good fortune of working for the largest corporation in North America.
Wow.
And learned a lot.
Right.
And, you know, wonderful company. Got some great experience. And I just kind of decided to head out on my own and start Elemental Cremation and Burial. We've got 2 offices, one in Seattle, one in Bellevue. So it's local.
What's the number to reach you?
So 206-357-1141 is our office number.
So that's 206-357-1141.
1141.
And one of the things that I believe, that I recall when we talked about this is that, you know, the big national firms and maybe around the nation, it's maybe more popular in some spots to have burial versus cremation.
Sure. So funeral, let me define a couple of terms real quick. Like here, funeral is everything from the point of death to the point of disposition. And disposition is either cremation or burial in the state. There's also medical, you know, donation and things like that. But most people...
So I spend my time talking about the disposition of, you know, personal effects in cars,
right.
And you're talking about bodies. Got it.
So you've got to do something with the deceased, and it's either cremate or bury. And so funeral is sort of a broad term, and different parts of the country do it differently. So here in the Northwest, we're about 95% cremation in the Seattle metro area.
95%.
95, as opposed to, say, Alabama, which is 11% or something on the order of small digits. And the country in aggregate is on balance about 50%.
Okay.
50-50.
There's a huge cost difference in those two choices, right?
Massive. So, cremation is certainly more affordable. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have services. So people tend to equate cremation with, pick up the body, cremate, return the remains to the family. And that isn't really the case. We're starting to see families that are wanting more ritual, wanting a little more connection. So if
you can still have a very rich memorial and a service and
absolutely.
Memories and
Sure.
pastors and hymns and songs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. With cremation.
With cremation. So, for example, it's fairly traditional with Catholics to have the full Catholic Mass and a visitation prior, and that's all completely doable. And then we just cremate instead of going to the graveside.
The new Pope hasn't weighed in on that, has he?
He hasn't yet. It's only a matter of time, though. Second Vatican was when they weighed in on that. So, there's a lot of options out there is what I'm trying to say. So, if you are, Lutheran and you have a tradition in your family of a visitation, that's an option. Episcopalian, that's an option for a visitation, and still do cremation. And really where it gets more affordable is you're not buying that expensive casket. It doesn't have to be the $20,000 burial casket. Or, funeral tends to be the less expensive side of this. What I didn't mention earlier is cemetery is the other half of it. So cemetery property is where it gets a little pricey.
Cemetery property.
Mm-hmm. So, that can go anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on the cemetery side. You can get into some big numbers over there.
Jeff, I had this was not my client. I guess just in the circles that I am, I hear about death and dying, and I help family. I do probates,
Sure.
I do trusted
As
bids,
one does, yeah.
But there's a saying in estate planning: you never know someone till you die, and it kind of has to do with money. And this is a story about a son who was estranged from his father. There's things happen, and it's sad, but, if you're out there and you're wrestling with, you don't get along with the same kids the same way, they have different needs. I mean, come to me, talk to me. We're happy to talk about those things. At any rate, this son, he when Dad died, all that estrangement turned into guilt, and he spent like $30,000 to bury the dad, and it created all sorts of stress with the siblings because they're like, Dad, simple pine box or cremate.
Yep.
Dad, there's no way Dad would have wanted this. Is this
Right.
common where people kind of get emotional?
Sure, and I've said it 1,000 times, and I'll say it again right here. I've never seen a fight in a funeral home that didn't have a dollar sign.
I'll say that again.
I mean, there's always a dollar sign attached to that argument. And, death is complicated. The arrangements aren't. I mean, what we have to do as funeral directors or what you have to do as an estate attorney, really isn't as complicated as people think it is.
Yeah. But it's embedded in emotion.
That's where it gets
denial.
That's where it gets complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that grief is very real, and people offset it in different ways. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's cash. Yeah.
Anger and cash.
And it's Saturday morning. Here we go.
Yeah. So, I think this is a great time for any of you. We got it covered during the life. I mean, I spend my living, that's my calling, is to help people organize things so that you protect the assets for the right people in the right way. Many times people want to prepay for the funeral or stuff like that. And if people are wondering what happens when someone dies, you're here. We're available for that. So we're going to take a break. What I want you to do is, if you're thinking about, my gosh, is cremation better? What should it cost? Why should I do this planning? How can I avoid any of these sorts of hassles? Give us a call at 1-800-955-8200.
Legacy Planning. Legacy Planning with Steve Waltar. Has it been over 5 years since you've reviewed your estate plan? Well, the laws keep changing. You'll definitely want to keep listening. The lines are open at 800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200. Legacy Planning. Live and local. This is Legacy Planning with Steve Waltar. Wondering if you really have complete, up-to-date estate plans? Call Steve right now at 800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200.
All right, we're back. We are back talking about legacy planning. How do you properly plan to leave the least amount of mess? How can you provide a plan that's going to work for the next generation or two? I sometimes ask people, when are you going to know if you had a good estate planning attorney? And they laugh and they smile and they go, well, you're not going to know. It's the kids or someone's going to know, was it a good plan? And Jeff, you were raising a point about, the dollar sign comes into play after someone dies. So what's the cost range for a cremation? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's pretty broad. So at the low end, $500 for a simple cremation, somewhere right around in there in the Seattle market. And then that goes all the way up to about $4,500 for the exact same service with some of the firms around here. So
$4,500, a $4,000 swing in price?
Yes. Yeah. And,
You guys want to save some money there, give us a call at 1-800-955-8200, or you can actually call Jeff directly at Elemental, 206-357-1141. That is 206-357-1141. Where are you at in that spectrum?
So we try and keep it pretty affordable. So we're at $595, and that's a simple cremation. It includes everything except for if you pass away in King County, there's a $60 medical examiner fee that's charged for every death in the county.
Yeah,
and then death certificates are $20 a piece. So most families are in between $695 and $715.
If someone messes up the death certificate, can you help them fix that?
Sure.
Okay.
Anyone can help you with that. As far as a funeral director can send in what's called an affidavit of correction and get that tidied up.
So what happens in cremation?
So the process itself, what
would our listeners want to know?
Well, that's treading. So the cremation process, with any funeral, we transfer the person into our care, and we have them in refrigeration. Funeral homes in Washington State use refrigeration to hold the body while we do the paperwork. So
every time you drive by a funeral home, there's a basement, there's a cooling spot, there's a place to store bodies.
Yeah, you gotta have them rest for a little while we get the paperwork in order. And so
probably hospitals do too, right?
So hospitals have morgues. There's only one or two around here that don't, and you got to race down there and get them. While the doctor's signing the death certificate and we're filing it and recording it with the county and getting permits, people are typically in refrigeration. And then once that cremation is...
What's the permit for?
So the King County Medical Examiner issues a permit to cremate, so it's a disposition authority. And then Vital Statistics issues a permit so that it's basically saying that this death is on record with the county and we know what's going on.
Okay.
Otherwise it's kind of Wild West-ish. So it's a good thing that there's permits. And the cremation itself is about 2.5 hours and 1,800 degrees. So it's hot and it's not as quick
1,800 degrees. Now, if I don't want to be calloused, but if we're cooking a steak, we had a steak last night, and barbecue, that's what? You're a few hundred degrees, aren't you? 300, 400?
400, yeah.
Yeah.
There.
So
this is hot.
1,800 degrees.
It's hot.
Wow.
And there's a lot of water. So,
okay.
So at any rate, the process is pretty straightforward. It's fire. But then at the end of that process...
And one more thing, if the place where they actually do the cremation... I bet you it services an awful lot of funeral homes and cremation.
There are a couple of
facilities
that are contracted crematories specific to cremation, and then there are other funeral homes who have their own crematory. And one of the reasons why I can do it at $595 is that I do contract with a family-owned crematory here in the Seattle area, and it's...
Well, what I was thinking is, even if the same place does the cremation, the burning, they probably have a bunch of different people they service.
Correct.
And if you're doing it for $600 and someone else is charging $4,000 or whatever,
what's the difference?
Well, no, there's probably no difference other than who they work with. The clients.
Yes, ish. So there are certain overheads of any business.
Right.
So, for example, we have two small little kind of shared office spaces. So I don't spend a whole bunch of money on a chapel and big arrangement office and all of that.
Like at law firms, do you have a vase
Exactly.
or a vase, or are you in the 62nd floor of the Columbia Tower, the Bank of America Tower, or are you in my office where it's free parking? And
Right, exactly. So that's really the difference. And, some families are more comfortable going into a place with the big office and and you pay for that.
I think it's kind of creepy to walk in and see this and that. And, you walk into a place. When my father-in-law died, it's like you walk in and, oh, my gosh. They put on the sad face, the funeral director, and you walk, and always you see the most expensive stuff first, right? That's marketing, right?
Sure.
Talk a little bit about marketing from a funeral home standpoint.
So you pretty much hit the nail on the head. If you have expensive stuff to sell, you're going to want the expensive stuff to sell in front of the person, right?
Right.
And so,
it reconditions. You start seeing the nicer stuff, and you don't.
Right, exactly. And that stuff.
Well, I may not need the first three, but I need the 4, 5, or 6.
Right, the middle ones are okay. So, every funeral home's different, and a lot of us in the Seattle area have kind of figured out that most people in our region, in our city, are very pragmatic. They don't really see the value in that huge price tag.
Yeah.
And so, what we do is we just try and provide something that the family wants and needs, instead of trying to move them in a different direction. My long-term goal is to, really provide something that families can come back to generation after generation and trust.
Yeah.
And you can't trust someone that's trying to sell you a $15,000 casket every time you walk through the door. So, everyone's needs are different,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when someone does the cremation and they have the remains, what are their options?
So what's returned from cremation is actually bone, and it's sort of a misnomer that it's ash. We're required to process it down so it's a finer consistency, but whether you're buried or you're cremated, what remains at the end of the 2 hours or the 2 decades is bone. And so those remains can be scattered, and in the Seattle area, you can scatter in any navigable waterway. So in other words, you could do Lake Union, Lake Washington, Puget Sound, Green Lake, off limits.
Yeah. I row on Green Lake for certain crew races, but it's small little contained area.
Right.
So, maybe someone's done it, but they're not supposed to. They wouldn't get permission to do it there.
Exactly. And actually, Washington State Ferries has a great program. You can call them directly and schedule with them, and you can scatter off the back of the ferry. They will slow down in the middle of the crossing, and you can scatter in Puget Sound.
I read that on your website. So what's your website?
So www.elementalnw, as in northwest.com.
elementalnw.com. Yeah, I found that to be fascinating.
Yeah, there's quite a few resources up there that you can poke through, and gives you some information. I really think one of the things that's missing in the funeral industry is just kind of straight talk at this point in time, and that's one of my passions is, look, let's pull the veil back on this. There's no mystery. We aren't the keepers of some secret. We aren't. It's funeral care. It's caring for your dead loved one.
Right.
In Washington State, you don't even need me. Legally, you can carry your own dead to the cemetery. You can care for them.
You don't need a license to do that.
No.
So the Griswolds, when their grandma died and they put her up on
they were
top of the car,
within their rights. they were just missing a couple of permits. So,
yeah.
And that's the thing. You can take on more than you think you can. And you know what? A decent firm will let you know what you can do.
So are you given, do people ask you, where should I sprinkle the remains?
Usually people come to me with an idea. If Dad had a favorite elk hunting spot, or, Mom spent her time rowing crew on Lake Washington. These are things that they kind of know when they come in, but they usually come to me with validation. And the truth is, if you're going to scatter in a public place, you need the permission of whatever that governing body is. The waterways, you actually don't need permission, but Mount Rainier, you need a permit from the park ranger.
Okay, I'm wearing my Alpine Ascents hat today in honor of reading your website, because I got to summit Mount Rainier a few years back, and the day we were descending, it was really warm. It was in August, and they actually discovered some bodies because people die up there climbing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't shock me that there's tons of people that want to be scattered on this glorious, beautiful mountain.
Yeah, it is in our backyard, and it's a part of our makeup. So, there is a lot of scattering up there. If you're going to do it on private property, you need permission of the owner of that property. So, it's not.
And that was straight talk on your website. It's like, you like the written permission of the landowner.
It's
for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, so that you're not later sued or something like that, but it creates a record.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the one thing that sort of traditional funeral homes will bemoan is that, when you scatter, it's done forever and you're lost to the annals of time. And it's like, actually, this is something you can put in the family history. You can put the latitude, longitude, you can, put the day and date and time and that can be part of the history too. It's your history is what you make of it. Your legacy is what you are willing to commit to. And, it doesn't have to be in a cemetery.
What was that Morgan Freeman movie with Jack Nicholson?
Oh, see, movies.
It was like... he was a kind of really wealthy guy. He ran a bunch of hospitals, and then he got really sick of cancer. They traveled the world, and I think the ashes went on this, I don't know, it was Kilimanjaro. No, I think it was another mountain.
I am not the encyclopedia for movies.
Forget the name.
Anyway,
but it was a good movie.
Yeah. But, everyone's got their goofy story of what they want. I had one lady that told me she wanted to be taken to all the casinos across the country in a little bit, put in an ashtray in each one of them. I was like, all right, well, that's weird. So
if you have a question on cremation and costs or what can you do and where can you do, give us a call at 1-800-955-8200. 955-8200, and we're going to talk about that. You've got Jeff available this week and me as well to talk about these sorts of things. What are some of the most common questions that you get, Jeff?
When it comes to cremation, do I get my loved one back is very common. And the truth is, yes, you do, because all cremations by law are performed individually.
Right.
We can do multiple people under special circumstances. The only time I've really seen that is like a father-daughter in a car crash.
Yeah.
And they wanted the cremation performed at the same time. Same thing with spouses. But otherwise, yes, all cremations are performed individually. And, I kind of joke when people say, well, am I actually going to get my dad back? And I don't want your dad. I didn't know him, so I have every intention.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah. This is your business. You don't really need that.
No, and I don't want to hinge my business on making a mistake there. So, the sanctity of that body is paramount. And so, it isn't something that's taken lightly. And that is a very common question. So, the main question is cost. I mean, honestly, that's what the phone rings about. How much does it cost? And, there aren't hidden fees, or shouldn't be if you deal with a funeral home. My disclaimer that I usually give people when they call is, if a person's over 300 pounds, there's an additional fee for that. There's special handling.
Sometimes on a plane, if you can't fit in a seat, guess what? You're going to have to pay a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy right there, Steve.
Yeah, so we should, after on our next segment, maybe we can talk. We can parse what are the actual costs, what's controllable, and maybe how do you make this easy on the family later. If you've got a question about death or burial or the cost of burial, give us a call at 1-800-955-8200. If you're worried about how do you make this easy on not only your spouse, but if you're married, when you're both gone, how do you make sure the kids are not fighting about this stuff? So after our break, we'll be back to talk more about estate and funeral trust planning.
Do you need a will or trust or no planning at all? You're listening to Legacy Planning with Steve Waltar. Join in the conversation at 800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200. Legacy Planning. You're listening to Legacy Planning with Steve Waltar. Join in the conversation now at 800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200.
All right, we're back. We're back, and a very gracious caller called in and said, "That's the bucket list, Steve. That is the movie you're talking about." Yeah, where they did a cremation and they went up on a mountain and someone honored a life by placing their remains there. So I forget some of the other things we were covering there, but I think that where you place it. When I was at seminary before law school, I remember in one of kind of the counseling courses, they said, it's really not a good idea to have the remains of your first spouse, memorialized in an urn in the bedroom. Does not help with kind of the romantic flair for a remarriage.
Probably not. Huh?
Yeah. Have you heard other stories about where the remains or an urn may end up?
What's interesting about my job is I'll hear back from families from time to time, but they usually don't fill me in on where they go. They'll touch base when Dad gets sick after Mom died, but they don't tell me where Mom went. I wish I had a story for you there.
They almost want permission beforehand,
right.
Kinda, is this okay? But they don't want to report back to you.
Right. Yeah, they're kind of off doing their thing. Most people don't call their funeral director for a social call.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Have you heard of People's Memorial?
I have.
Yeah. What the heck's the deal with that?
Well, People's Memorial is an organization that has been around in Seattle since 1932, I think. At any rate, they're a long-standing funeral association. So they started out. They actually have kind of a cool history. It was a group of guys that didn't want to be taken for a ride by the funeral industry, and they approached Jacob Blights way back when and said, "Hey, what if we negotiate this price?"
We're going to get right back to that because we've got a caller.
Okay.
We've got a caller, and I believe it's Jesse from Snohomish. Are you on the line?
Yes, sir.
Thanks you for calling. What's your question today, Jesse?
It's regarding cremation. My grandmother was cremated. We buried her or spread her ashes up by Mount Rainier. But
yeah,
for faith, dead is caught up, from the ground. I'm just wondering, when Jesus comes back, how does that work? Maybe there isn't a hypothesis for that. Maybe we just need to wait and see. But
well, I didn't reread it today, but I was thinking one of the best sermons I ever heard at Princeton was Ezekiel and the dry bones, and how God would breathe on the dry bones, and He made bodies and all that. I don't think God is needing. God can have the. I think what you're talking about is how do we have the new restored a new body in heaven in an afterlife? Is that kind of the core of your question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think God can create out of nothing. God could take those bones. God could take those cremations. I don't think that we can mess up anything so bad God can't create a new body for us. That's my belief.
Yeah, I guess we're made out of dust. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and what I find is that most people, think about it. There's a story told about someone that was able to... they were so proud they met St. Pete at the pearly gates, and they brought an entire brick of gold. And he was so proud, he told St. Pete, "Did you see what I brought?" And he says, "What, you brought pavement? Like the streets are paved of gold." I think that what we try to bring to God in the afterlife, we're totally relying on God. I really don't think cremation or burial, do we really think that by having a body and we've embalmed it or not, that we're going to make it easier or harder for God to make a new being that lasts forever?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Sense.
But I appreciate the call, and I think people wrestle with this sort of thing. Wouldn't you say, Jeff, that sometimes there's a difference of opinion
Sure.
with the family?
Sure, and that is certainly a faith-based question because our faith dictates our tradition.
Mm.
And if you're a Catholic, Catholic funerals are easy to work because there's a very prescribed service order. There's a very prescribed method to how you handle the dead. Whereas you get a Unitarian family that sort of makes it up as they go along. Neither is right or wrong.
Right.
They're all good and they're all healing. It's just your faith will prescribe what is going to be healing to you.
Jesse, I'll give you one more comment unless you have more. Do you have more questions for us?
No, that just makes sense. You know, if you are living your life from the good book, the holy word of God, you know, we were created out of the dust of the earth, and so anything's possible with God. So
yeah, I mean, if you die in a car accident and you're already incinerated, I mean, God can make a new body. The other thing that I'll say, and thank you for the call, Jesse. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The other thing that I'll tell people is, even if someone tells this sounds weird, it sounds interesting, but even if someone says, look, I really don't want a big burial, I don't want this or that, it's pretty rare they put that in their will or trust because, frankly, it's not controlling unless you're going to incentivize someone for doing something and give them money. But when I'm counseling a family after someone has died, I say it's really about you. You know, mom or dad, they're maybe they weren't the most religious people in the world, but if you need a memorial service, you do one. This is for you to move on in life. This is for you to celebrate a life.
Absolutely. You know, one thing that the funeral side of the law actually does speak to the controlling function of that prearrangement, and it states, and no one's tested this that I'm aware of in case law, it states that you cannot significantly change or alter the prearranged wishes of the decedent. Now, the question is, what defines significantly? So if you wanted a memorial service, but you wanted burial, and your kid changes it to a memorial service with cremation, is that significant? I don't know, and people haven't weighed in on that. However, I will say that emotionally, at the time of death, whatever you lay down for your children to do, they will adhere to it pretty closely, to the best of their ability.
Yeah, I found that too. People want to honor gifts that didn't make it to the will or trust.
Sure.
Mom said that they wanted my granddaughter, and even the other kids that differ with that, they're like, no, I want to honor what mom or dad said.
Right, absolutely. And really, when you're talking about pre-planning funeral, or you're talking about setting up your legacy and setting up the trust, it's really about creating a roadmap for those people that you leave behind. So the roadmap that you create in the larger legal framework, you know, whether that includes their faith and you know, gifts to the church and things like that, that's a roadmap that family can follow. And just the same with funeral, it's a roadmap so that when you do die, people aren't scratching their heads and stewing over what they don't know.
Absolutely. You know, one of the things before the caller is you were giving me the history of people's memorial, but you know, I even had my grandma's car died at Blight's funeral home that you were mentioning. Right. So, I don't know if you want to finish that story or
just nutshell version.
Okay.
They now have a funeral home, and it's up on Capitol Hill. They have contracted funeral homes around the state, and they offer fairly affordable. They're a little more than me, but they're certainly a reasonable funeral home. And you know, they're a great organization that also has a legislative wing that I work with fairly closely to you know, kind of change law in the state with regards to disposition and stuff that's probably not that interesting. But I mean, I work with them fairly closely, but you know, they're just
so
home.
Here's what I tell people, and I draft funeral trusts. I don't charge people. I want to get into what are funeral trusts, but you know, sometimes when I ask, hey, do you have a plan for burial, whatever, they say, oh, I've got I'm a member of People's Memorial,
right?
And I say, you've heard of Costco, right? I mean, you know, it's like so. That's like you have a Costco card.
Exactly.
You have entrance into their store. Do you really think that for $25 or whatever, do you really think that that's going to pay for your cremation when you die? So
to give the listeners a little background on that, and I think that's where you're driving in the first place. People's Memorial, you pay, I believe it's $25 now for a membership into their organization. And with that membership, you are afforded member prices.
I'm a member. I get member prices, whatever they are down the road.
Exactly. So that member price is discounted. However, with that $25 card, you have not paid for your service.
There's no prepayment. Yeah.
No.
With them.
Right. I mean, you can prepay, but that's a whole different story.
All right. I think we got a call from Jerry, who's in Gig Harbor. Jerry, you got a question?
Yes. I wonder if you could cover the military aspect of funerals and what the VA does for them.
Jerry, that is a fantastic question. The VA will cover the cemetery side of things. So like I said earlier about...
that's a big piece.
That is a huge piece. So from death to the cemetery gates is what's called funeral. And the cemetery side is everything inside those gates. So the space, in the case of burial, you have a liner or vault for the grave, marker and marker setting fees, and all these things add up to literally thousands of dollars. And the VA will cover that side of things. So many people will call me and say, oh, well, the VA is going to take care of the funeral. The VA won't pay for the funeral side of things, but you do have a space at Tahoma National, and you've got your grave marker, and your spouse as well has a space at Tahoma National. And it's a pretty simple process. The military does an amazing job of services down there.
And my father-in-law, he was in the U.S. Coast Guard, and but I've been and we got a flag presentation. So sometimes you will be able to get a very nice. It's touching, emotionally.
It's incredible.
Service. There's no charge for that.
There's no charge.
And the flag.
And the flag. Yeah. So you get a flag, you get the burial space, you get the marker, the vault, and military honors at Tahoma.
But still, for Jerry and others like him, there's still some value in either talking, having some pre-plan with the death certificate
absolutely,
stuff.
Absolutely. So, Jerry, the best thing that you can do is have your DD-214 or separation papers available to your kids. And for everyone out there, get a form that has all of the information that's on the death certificate. You can go to elementalnw.com, and there's a copy of the death certificate worksheet. Most funeral homes will have a worksheet for the death certificate. So if you have that worksheet filled out, you have your DD-214 filled out, and if you wish for cremation, just fill out your cremation authorization. If you self-authorize cremation and you have all that death certificate information, and this is the crux of the whole discussion for the hour as far as funeral is concerned, those documents will take 90% of the weight off your family.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Does that hit the mark, Jerry?
Yeah, I think it's covered.
Okay. Thank you so much for the call, Jerry. I'm gonna go on and talk a little bit more about veteran stuff before we take our last break, and that is that in Medicaid, people know, hey, there's a 5-year look back. You can't qualify for Medicaid immediately.
Right.
If you say, oh, I want to write a big check, I want to move it out, and sometimes people plan poorly, and they qualify, and then there's a lien on the home, etc. So I can do safe harbor trusts, I can do all sorts of things, but the VA does not have a look back.
Is that so?
So, and they've talked. It's supposed to kick in this month, but it did not kick in February, and that sort of thing. So it keeps getting delayed. They're going to institute eventually a 3-year look back.
Oh, okay.
But there's different rules. If someone served our nation during a period of war and they were honorably discharged, or at least not dishonorably, then there's kind of a long-term care benefit. And I can draft special powers of attorney or do special trusts, and there's ways to help these families.
I get calls on military benefits and things like that. I'm just going to start sending them all to your office. But no, I mean, I get questions like that frequently, and I tell families often, when it comes to the VA and military benefits, I mean, that is such a, did you serve in Vietnam? Is there a special program for that? I have no idea.
So we're going to take our last break here, and what I want to do is talk stories afterwards. But if you're wondering, my gosh, should I pre-plan? Should I do a funeral trust? Give us a call at 1-800-955-8200, and we'll address that for you.
Legacy Planning. You're listening to Legacy Planning with Steve Waltar. Is there ever a good time to do estate planning? Ask your kids. They'll know that right now would be the perfect time. Call in for the right answers at 800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200. Legacy Planning. This is Legacy Planning with Steve Waltar, committed to helping you with personalized and compassionate estate planning. The lines reopen for your call at 800-955-8200. That's 800-955-8200.
We're back. We're back talking legacy planning, and we're talking funeral planning. We've got Jeff Jorgenson, who founded Elemental. You do lots of cremation, and one of the things that I wanted to at least introduce to the listeners is I can do in a will or trust, say I want to be buried or not, but that doesn't prepay for it. And so I actually don't charge people to draft a funeral trust where people can earmark money. It grows outside of their estate. You can't even get 3% in a CD these days, but these policies will pay 3%. It pays 1 business day after someone dies. You don't even need a death certificate in Washington for this to pay to a funeral home. And for some of my families, this helps solve it. Whether they want cremation or burial, whether they want memorial, I just think it helps solve a problem. So that's the extreme. I mean, I think people really wanting to make it easy on the loved ones can do this. I'm happy to give you this chapter. It's chapter 36 from my first book on funeral trusts. So any caller during the week, go to waltar.com, waltar.com, and request a funeral trust brochure or a chapter, something like that. But, Jeff, what can you tell people, whether they do a full-blown funeral trust or not? How do people make this easy on their loved ones? What should they do at a bare minimum?
Okay, so like I just mentioned in the last segment was if you fill out the information for the death certificate, the things that usually hang people up is Social Security number, mother's maiden name. Those are the 2 big ones. But if you have that document, a worksheet for the death certificate, filled out so your family just has it, or we as a funeral home have it on file, that's huge.
I tell people, look, I want Social Security number. I need some of this stuff, and I can lock it up, make sure no one can get it. But that is needed when someone dies.
Right. It's not. I mean, I can file a death certificate unknown, and it's not going to be very helpful for you. So having that death certificate worksheet filled out, if you want cremation, just authorize your own cremation. Get a proper disposition authorization from just about any funeral home. You can get it from my website, elementalnw.com. Just download it. It's good at any funeral home. It's good.
Yeah, that's one of those downloadable forms. I saw that right there.
Just those 2 things are the bulk of it. Now, if you want to prepay, like we always say, I mean, everyone's finances are different, so it depends. But you can.
That's an attorney answer. It depends.
It's a funeral.
It depends.
It's a funeral director answer too. So trusts are excellent. And insurance is another good vehicle. So life insurance pays upon death. So it's sort of a natural for a funeral home to use that.
Yeah.
And, those are really flexible policies. That's a way to pay for it. The trust, that's a family that really wants to go all the way for the kids. So,
any planning is better than no planning.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Can you tell me, I think we were talking during breakfast about some clients, pancreatic cancer. Just give us a few stories on what can happen and what sometimes happens.
Sure. So, TV has sort of gotten to the public with, post-mortem shows. And every once in a while I'll get a family. I had a family last December that the father died of pancreatic cancer.
Yeah.
And that's a fast one. For those of you out there that don't know about pancreatic cancer, usually it's diagnosed before it's it's way too late. It's already spread. So
it's like 90% fatal in the first 6 months. My father-in-law died of pancreatic cancer, but I know of one survivor. I do. I know of a survivor, and he gives hope to people. But
he's one of 3, maybe, because that is a fatal one and fast. So at any rate, this family, dad died of pancreatic cancer, and they thought there was something untoward with the medical care. And
something wrongful about the care.
And they wanted an autopsy. And autopsies aren't free. They start at about $4,000. And they have to be done by a pathologist, so it's a medical doctor that goes in and does the autopsy.
Right.
And those findings, it's time sensitive. You don't get to wait 3 weeks and say, "Hey, can we do an autopsy?" And so, these are things that families think they can do, and it's just not practical, and certainly not practical if you haven't planned for it. So, there's a lot of sort of misinformation out there as to what you can do with human remains and get information out of them.
Yeah. Huh. And then I think you had a story of someone that was homeless. Can you mention something about that?
Sure. So this isn't uncommon. This woman passed away and she was homeless here in Seattle, and the family had been estranged since, the oldest son was a teenager. And so they flew in, the whole family flew in and had a visitation. And they hadn't seen this woman in 20 years. And, of course, life on the streets.
I remember the movie Four Weddings and a Funeral. People gather for, celebrations, but also death is a time to gather, even if you've been away a long time.
Absolutely. And so this was a situation where they were trying to find closure with a mom that had left them as teenagers, and she was in pretty rough shape.
I bet.
Time on the street and drug use and sort of falling out of everything. And And so it was traumatic for them. And, you know, I as a funeral director can only base what I provide to people, you know, on what I can see. And it's like, well, she doesn't look that great, but it's your closure, you're grieving. And, you know, it's just different for everyone. There's just no easy way to get through that.
What did it cost the family to fly here and do this
and
that?
I mean, it was thousands of dollars by the time they finished up. I mean, my bill was, you know, about $1,300, which, you know, in the grand scheme of things isn't that bad. But, you know, flying 4 people from all corners of the country, you know, you're $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 in to see someone that you haven't seen in 20 years who's in some pretty rough shape. You know, I don't know how healing that is. But here's the other question. I mean, if you don't, you get to spend the rest of your life wondering if you
not
should.
Knowing, yeah.
I mean, there's just no good answer.
So this
there.
is one of the things that I talk about in legacy planning. It's not just handling the legal and the money and all that, but making sure there are stories of the memories and the values
Absolutely.
and the pictures. Here
Absolutely.
at Legacy Planning, this is what we do. And I do this for a living. I do this every day of the week. I would love for you to call our office at 425-455-6788. That's 425-455-6788. You know, we're all going to die. Why not make this thing end properly? I think the last thing people want is a bunch of fighting and expenses and funeral and embalming. And wouldn't it be nice if it's well organized? And it's always a gift when someone says to me, wow, I wish I could say thank you to Mom and Dad for making this process so easy. That's the field I'm in. That's the field you're in, is trying to help make that go well. So, yeah, we'll bring in accountants. We'll bring in others in the future. But by all means, if you want to talk about how to have a proper legacy, give us a call at 425-455-6788. You're listening to Legacy Planning. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful week. God bless.
You've been listening to Legacy Planning with local attorney Steve Waltar. If you have questions about what you heard on today's show or estate planning in general, be sure to call Steve's office in Bellevue to schedule your free no-obligation consultation. Call Steve at 425-455-6788. That's 425-455-6788. And remember, you can always listen to today's or previous programs by going to waltar.com. That's WALTAR.com. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and be sure to join us again next Saturday morning from 8 till 9, right here on 820 AM KGNW.